Senator Steve Daines of Montana, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the opening night of the Republican Jewish Coalition Summit. So much to talk about. Obviously, the Israel-Hamas conflict at the top of the list. You were just in Israel, about a month and a half ago now. You saw the situation up close. How does that relate to what we're seeing on television here today?
We know it was our fifth visit to Israel. It was the best visit we've ever had. We were taken to the border between Lebanon and Israel, taken down to the Hezbollah terror tunnels by IDF forces, dropped 80 feet down, and then we got to the bottom of the tunnel and started pointed towards Lebanon. Of course, that's all been blocked off now, but in that tunnel, painted in Arabic, it says, "On the way to Jerusalem." Chilling. But let's not forget, they've been digging that tunnel since 2014. The attacks on Israel have been planned for many, many years. There's 150,000 rockets in southern Lebanon pointed at Israel. And Hezbollah has embedded these rockets, these missiles, in mosques, in hospitals, in schools. And what we've seen transpire since October 7th, these horrible terror attacks, is the complete disregard for life. A culture that celebrates death, an ideology that celebrates death, and contrasts that with the Jews in Israel who celebrate life. And that's why every life's so precious, and why they'll go to whatever length possible to get those hostages freed that we think about every day.
You had a chance to sit down with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time. We were living in a pre-October 7th and post-October 7th world at this time. But what did you talk about at that point in time?
Yeah, I was probably the last U.S. senator to meet with Bibi prior to the invasion in Jerusalem. It was a great discussion, and it's no surprise. Our number one topic was Iran. It was Hamas. It was Hezbollah. I've been down in the Hamas terror tunnels on the Gaza Strip several years ago. Now I've seen the Hezbollah terror tunnels. Israel lives in a very, very tough neighborhood, and it's so important at this crucial moment in history that we have moral clarity, that we stand unequivocally with Israel, to allow Israel to do what it needs to do to protect itself. And I think if there's anything we've seen as I've chatted with the Prime Minister, is this appeasement strategy with Iran doesn't work. The JCPOA doesn't work. Relieving the oil sanctions on Iran doesn't work. It only gives these terror groups more fuel to build more weapons of destruction to attack Israel.
I wanted to talk to you about that because there's a whole global economy essentially built in order to funnel money into Iran and its terror proxies. We saw recently $6 billion of Iranian oil revenue freed up as part of a hostage and prisoner exchange. It's sitting in a Qatari bank account right now. You want it pulled back, and you've introduced a bill to try to do just that, to claw that money back. What can you tell us about?
Yeah, the legislation I introduced would take that $6 billion of frozen assets and transfer those to Israel. Let Israel use that $6 billion to defend itself. Look, these Hamas terrorists, as we've seen these recent reports in the last 3 days, were trained in Iran. It's just not that Iran was training them in Gaza. These terrorists were actually in Iran being trained. Iran is the largest sponsor of terror in the world. Why is it we have an administration that wanted to unfreeze that $6 billion and transfer it back to Iran? Why did this administration basically stop the freeze and the suspension on oil exports for Iran, which is now amounted to $80 billion. $80 billion of additional revenues that flowed in Iran because this administration, the Biden administration, removed the maximum pressure campaign and instead allowed Iran to have these billions of dollars flow into its economy.
I want to ask you about that because the Biden administration, at least publicly, has gone all out in its support of Israel during this war. There have obviously been cautions issued privately, but publicly all out. And yet it seems to have blinders on when it comes to the whole base of this issue in the Middle East, which is Iran and its proxies. How do you explain that dichotomy?
Yeah, well, first of all, I applaud President Biden for going to Israel, and that was an important gesture, it was an important symbolic gesture. But while he's going to Israel, while we're talking about this horrible terror attack, it's equally important to make sure we call out who the good guys are and the bad guys are. This is the moment needed for moral clarity. Why can't the president call out Iran? Why can't he say Iran is behind these attacks? Iran's behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah, behind the Houthis. They're the Houthis in Yemen who are launching cruise missiles and drone strikes that the USS Crane in the Red Sea are taking down. I'll tell you, I was very troubled by President Biden's comments 48 hours ago in the Rose Garden when they had the Prime Minister of Australia in Washington, D.C. They came out to the Rose Garden to make the customary state remarks with Australia, the United States, and President Biden rightly started to address what's going on in Israel. But he started, he concluded at the end of his remarks talking about the need for a two-state solution. I was shocked to hear that. This is no time to be talking about a two-state solution. This is a time to make sure we're standing clearly, unequivocally with Israel, to allow Israel to do what it needs to do to defend herself.
How can the Senate be at this point most helpful in making sure that happens? Is it timely passage of bills to transfer weapons, to get funding in place? What can the Senate most effectively do at this point?
Yeah, well, two things: to continue to vocally and unequivocally stand with Israel. I mean, this needs to be a daily kind of messaging, because as you see, world opinion quickly can turn against Israel. So it's important that we stand unequivocally, stand strongly with Israel. But second, we need to pass that additional supplemental assistance there to provide Israel with another $14 billion of aid at this time of need.
Now that, well, at least for now, the chaos has ended in the House of Representatives, do you feel like at this point there can be a fruitful movement going forward on a timely basis to get this done?
Yeah, well, I was glad to see the House come behind Mike Johnson to elect him to be Speaker of the House. That's a very important step, because we've got to continue to lead, continue to govern, to continue to stand with Israel. I understand Speaker Johnson will be here as well. That's great news. A very important step here to see the united support that we have as Republicans in Washington behind Israel.
We often see, and it's said often enough, that the attacks against Israel don't stop with Israel and won't stop. They'll filter through to Europe and through to America. Even your partner, Democrat Senator in Montana, John Tester, has said the same. Protecting America's southern border. There's been more and more reports about potential illegals from the Middle East penetrating the southern border, possibly to carry out terror attacks. Can you give us some of the facts behind it and how concerned we should be about that?
Well, I mentioned it was about a month and a half ago I was on the border between Israel and Lebanon. 2 weeks ago I was on the southern border in McAllen, Texas. As I was picked up at the airport there in McAllen, Texas, and taken to the Ursula Processing Center, Border Patrol told me they'd picked up 4 Syrians overnight. So the untold story in the southern border, it's not just Central Americans and South Americans coming across the border. We have now encountered 169 people who are on the terror watch list as issued by the FBI. We're seeing Syrians, those from Iran, from Iraq, Afghanistan, North Korea. That's just in the first 2 weeks of October. We've had encounters with these individuals. The San Diego Border Patrol put out a bulletin just last Friday that gave warnings that there may be suspected Hamas terrorists entering from Mexico into the United States. This is chilling, and I think it worries many of us that what's going on the southern border is a national security issue. We could have lone wolf attacks. We could have organized terror cells going on at the moment here that could be unleashed at any time in our country, on our homeland, as we've seen what's happened in Israel.
What starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, and what starts in Israel doesn't end in Israel. Senator Steve Daines of Montana, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
Glad to join you.